Perfect. Thank you so much, Fennis, for giving us a time for this NG Finland. We will be talking on Angular Signals, and NG Finland is proud to have you on the screen. So yeah, it's this NG Finland is organizing this event, a couple of events, and since Fennis has been a GDE and Angular super content creator and serving multiple other communities in terms of Angular Athens, and he's a co-organizer of Angular Athens as well. So one of my good friend from Greece. So thank you so much, Fennis, for giving us a time, and we are proud to have you. So screen stage is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Mohammed. It was a great intro. In any case, you had my intro already, but this is my card. Let me introduce myself, and I will start with this one. My name is Fanis Prodromou. I'm a Google developer expert for Angular, senior Angular developer at the company ASI, co-organizer, like Mohammed said, of Angular Asset Meetup here in Greece, and an Angular content creator. So, in today's talk, we will talk about an experimental API. So, currently, things really looks amazing and seems to be robust, and the API, I really like it, but it's still experimental. Feel free to experiment with, but it's not good idea to use that in production. And we're talking about, of course, signal forms, which is something relatively new and an amazing thing. I have been thinking, what is the best way to explain to someone about something new? And of course, when you explain something new, we have to start small. And this is what I plan to do. I plan to explain a simple form of how to using a simple for using single forms, and progressively we will see how to have a complex form. And of course, we need to know and to understand the mental model behind that, and we have to understand how to use the validators. Other than the validators, which something that we already know from reactive forms, for example, we also have the logic part, which is something new in signal forms, and I really like that. And we will have a look into that. And of course, then we'll see how to split a form, right? Which is very crucial to split a form. And if time permits, we will see how to use how to create a custom form input. Currently, this is not part of my agenda. We'll see if we have the time. And if you want to start right away to use Signal Forms, all you have to do is to create a new application, but don't forget to have here the option hyphen next. So this is something that you can do using ngnew or ngupdate, again with hyphen next. And like what I said, to start small, we have to create a very small one, very small form, and what else? From a login form, user login form. And then we will see how to create a user registration form. And of course, then we will see a big form, how to create a contract form. For the contracting, we don't care about the details about the contracting. What we care about is that we have a big form and we will try to split that into smaller parts. So let's start with the login form. And the login we all know what this is all about. We have the email field, we have the password field, and we have the login button. And this is how the HTML looks like, right? Where we have the email, we have the password, and we have the button. Nice. Either we have template forms or reactive forms, or we have signal forms. What we have to have in mind is the data model. This is something that we should care about, and we should create the data model, the data structure actually for every form. For this one, for this particular, the data structure is very simple. All we have is just the login form model where we have the email and password fields, which are, yeah, just two fields and two properties into my interface. All right, so this is just the structure. How about now if I want somehow to keep the state of that structure? To accomplish that, what we have to do is simply to create just a writable signal. And in this case, what I have is my login model writable signal, where I have the email and password as empty fields. So currently we have seen nothing about signal forms. So let's now try to create the very first form. Okay. So to create a signal form, what you have to do is to use the form helper function, which is part of the Angular form signals package. And into the first argument, what we are doing, we are providing the writable signal that we have just created. And this is very important to understand the data model. And this is one of the key principles of the signal forms, that they do not maintain their own data. We, the developers, are responsible to provide a writable signal as the data model, where the form will be based on. So any change to this data model will affect the form values, and any change to the form values from our inputs will affect this writable signal. But how can I have the other communication from my input to the writable signal? Of course, there will have to apply a binding. And to apply the binding to our HTML input fields, what we have to do is to import the field directive. And then we just go there into the HTML template. And what we have to do is just to use the field directive by providing the path. And in this case, in the case of email, we have field login form.email. And the same thing is happening for my password, login form.password. Nice. And please note that the login form here is the instance of the form that we created just before. So this is, let's say, one third of the form story, meaning that we have already created the form. The form is there, and the form works very nice. But don't we need also to have the validators? And of course, we need to have the validators. So let's jump there to understand how to use the validators into the signal forms. The validators are part of the second argument of the signal forms, of the form helper function. And the second argument here is the schema function, where we can provide inline or predefined validators. And we will see what the predefined validators is all about. But wait a minute, what is this root path? And why is it called path? Well, it represents the location of your form. And in this case, we are accessing the root field. That's why I decided to name that like a root path. So either we have inline or predefined schema validators. Those validators are following a declarative approach. So let's now start adding a bit more validators. What I would like to do is to have my email as required. I would like to have my password as required as well. And you know what? I would like also to have my email following a specific pattern, the email pattern. Now, what I would like to do is to have a different perspective of the same form, of the same thing that you have I'm just presenting it to you. And this different structure, let's say, is a binary tree. So despite that we have only two fields in our form, we have the email and the password. How many nodes can we count here? We can count 3 nodes. We have the root, we have the email, and the password. And this is something very important to understand with signal forms, that the root is a field as well, and we can access the root and provide more logic there. So, like what we said previously, it follows a declarative approach. And what I would like now to do into this binary tree is the following. You know what? I would like my email to have certain items of logic or validators. And I would like the email to be required, the email to follow an email pattern, or the email could be hidden. And I would like to do the same thing for the password. I would like my password to be required or disabled. All right. So I have my metadata, let's say, on every field. What will happen now if I feed this one with some data? The data will be evaluated based on my metadata, based on the logic that I have for my email field and the password. And whenever we have an input, we expect also to have an output. And the output will be the state. So the email will have the state, could be invalid, touched, or hidden, and the password as well can have a state, dirty, touched, or disabled. Nice. So how can we walk now through the form fields? Well, we can do that simply by using the dot notation, meaning in this binary tree, the root is our login form, the thing that we created just before. And if I would like now to walk through my email, all I have to do is just login form.email. And the same thing is happening for the password. Login form.password. Nice. So let me ask you now, how can we access the state? Well, for the state, there is a nice pattern, and we do that simply by using parentheses. The login form, if we would like to access the state of the login form, we can do that, what I said, using the parentheses. And the same thing is happening for the email. First, we have to walk through there, login form.email, and we have the parentheses to grab the state, and then we do the same thing for the password. But what do we mean about state? Well, I mean that we can grab the value, the validity, the errors, the disabled status, if this is hidden, submitted status, and stuff like that. So since we now know how to access the state, you know what? Let's access the state. And what I mean by that is that I would like to have some error messages into my login form. To do that, what I have here is just a condition. If login form, I have to walk through there, grab the email, and as you can see, I'm using the parentheses to grab the state, and then I have touched. And touched, since this is a signal value, I have again to have my the parentheses. So currently this looks very similar to reactive forms, right? So what we're doing is that we're just checking if email is touched and if email is invalid. And in this case, the email is invalid. This is the message that we're displaying. But you know what? There are many cases where, or you know what, before we go there, of course, we can even disable the button. And in this case, I'm grabbing the state of the login form, which is the root form field, and using the invalid property. Regarding now the error messages, there are many times that I would like to have different error messages per validator, let's say. So in this case, what we can do is to loop over the errors. So just a for loop, login form dot email, grabbing the state dot errors, and we expect now just to iterate over this one and have certain conditions. If my error kind equals required, and you will understand what the kind is all about, I will provide this error message. This field is required. Nice. And of course, then we can elaborate more and have different error messages. If my error kind equals email, of error, if the error kind equals min length, and so on and so forth. So the kind here is has one-on-one relationship with my predefined validator. Nice. You know what? Currently, this works just nice. This is nice, and I like it, but not 100%. What I don't like from this perspective is that we have to revisit the HTML template whenever we have to introduce a new error message. Can we improve that? Yes, we can do that. We can improve that by utilizing the second argument of the predefined validators. Meaning, for the required or the email, what we can do is to have a second argument by providing a message. And this message will be the error message and will be used whenever, let's say, the required validator is marked as invalid or the email is marked as invalid. And if we now go to the HTML, this is all we have. All we have to do is to, again, loop over the errors and just grab the error message. No more than that. So in this case, the HTML is much simpler. Nice. And this is all about the validators that I would like to, I wanted to present to you. And this is, let's say, two-thirds of the story. What we need now is somehow to submit the form, right? So let's submit the form. Let's see actually how to submit the form. To submit the form, we can use the new helper function, submit, that accepts two arguments. The first argument is the form, whereas the second argument is an action handler. In our case, the first argument is the login form, and now the action handler, we will see the details, but you know what? Let's first understand what is this kind of thing, this form here. The form here into the arrow function isn't just a generic object. It's, let's say, the validated raw value of your form, and Angular automatically ensures all validation checks have passed before this arrow function is ever called. This is something like a green signal that, you know what, everything are okay with your form. You can now grab your form values and do whatever you like with the API. So let's now see what is the implementation of this arrow function. We can return undefined, and we do that whenever everything are okay. We do not have any error, but if we have any error, let's say, into the catch block, we can handle this kind of error, and we'll see how to do that. So let's add a bit more logic now here. For example, what we can do is just to use the first value from to convert an RxJS to promise, my login service dot login, and here what I have is my form dot value. I'm just grabbing the values of my form, providing that to my login method. And if everything are okay, I'm just returning undefined. If not, what we can do is grab the error message from the HTTP error message actually, and we can even assign that error message to a specific field so that we can mark that specific field as invalid. And please know that the submit, it's not the event handler, meaning we still need to have the event handler, right? We have the click event, we have the submit event, we have to click and listen to this kind of event. And in this case, this could be, let's say, submit form, and internally, we can have this submit helper function. And someone now would ask, why do I even have to use the submit helper function? Well, one good reason is that we can assign and handle the error message, the HTTP error messages, and assign them directly to a field. And the other that I really like a lot is that we have a dedicated status, the submitting status. Whenever my form is actually submitting, I can either disable the button or I can even have loading indicator that something is happening. And that's all from the login part. So let's now see a bit more things on how to create the user registration form. And the user registration is, again, very similar. What you have is just an email, password, the confirmed password, country, and state. And this is what the code looks like behind the scene, where we have the registration form. And again, we're using the same helper function, form, by providing the writable signal, and then into the inline, let's say, validator schema, we can provide the validators and the logic. And you know what? We won't see how to deal with the email. This is something that we have already seen. But what I would like to do now is to see how to deal with the password and confirm password, where the business requirements are very well known. All we have to do is just to make sure that the password value and confirm password value match. Okay? And we'll see two different approaches. Let's go and see the very first approach. For the very first approach, what I would like to do is to mark the confirmed password, only the confirmed password, as invalid. How can we do that? How can we accomplish that? Well, to do that, we have to create a custom validator. And we are doing that by utilizing the validate helper function. We have to provide the path. And this path is the path where actually this custom validator will be attached to. And then we'll have the context. And before we see the rest of implementation of the custom validator, I would like just to have a pause here and understand why this context is that important. Well, the schema function, either inline or predefined, run only once to set up the structure. So if it runs only once, it's static, right? On the other hand, the validation logic needs to run every time a field value changes. So it must be dynamic. So we have static from one side and dynamic from the other side. And this is where the context signs, let's say. The context is the reactive link, is a mechanism that let your validator access the live value and state of the form. Now that we have seen what the context is, let's see the implementation of the custom validator. The implementation is consistent to the submit helper function that we saw previously, meaning that if everything are okay, we return undefined. If not, we return a custom error. So let's add a bit more details now. Okay, so at first, I would like the custom validator to attach where to my confirmed password. This is what I would like to mark as invalid if I have any error. Now that we are under the confirmed password, we can grab the value, but at the same time, we need somehow to grab the value of another field, of the password field. And we are doing that by utilizing the context.value of, where is a helper function that returns the value of the specified path, path.password. So now that we have both the value of the confirmed password and the actual value of the password, what we can do is to return undefined if everything are okay, or to return a custom error. And since now this kind of custom validator is attached to the confirmed password, what we have to do in our case from the HTML template is just to grab the errors of the confirmed password. This is where this error will be attached to. Nice. Now let's see the second approach. And for this approach, what I would like to do is to mark both the password and confirmed password as invalid at the same time. How can we achieve that? Well, again, we need to create a custom validator. But this time, we will use the validate tree and not the validate function that we used previously. And again, here we have two different arguments, the path and the context. And the idea is same thing. If everything is okay, we return undefined. Otherwise, please know that we are not returning just a custom error. We return an array of custom errors. So let's understand now what the validate tree is all about. Well, let's say it's a specialized tool for validating a group of fields. And why to use that? Well, the standard validation, the validated helper function that we saw previously, puts the error on a specific field. Whereas with validate tree, we can target multiple fields. And the benefit is that we can access the value of the root and mark as invalid multiple fields. So let's now see the implementation of this custom validator. At first, what I have here is that I would like to access my root path, not a specific field, just my root path. And I'm grabbing the value and the field of, and then the idea is very simple. I would like just to grab the confirmed password and the password value, and if everything is okay, I return undefined. Otherwise, I return two different custom errors. One for the confirmed password and one for password. Just a side note here, I think that in the current version, field of has been renamed to something like field of schema, something like that. I'm not 100% sure, but this is since this is currently experimental, things change on every version. But the idea remains the same. So what we're doing is that we are marking two fields as invalid at the same time: confirm password and password. Nice. So that was all from, let's say, password perspective. Now, what I would like to do is to see how to access these two fields, where we have the country and we have the state. The business requirements are the following. If the country equals to US, then and only then the state should be visible and required. Okay? So let's see how to achieve that. The very first part is very easy. What we have to mark is country, to mark that as required. And then we would like to mark the state as required conditionally. And if you remember how we used to do that with reactive forms, it wasn't that easy, let's say. But with signal forms, this is now very easy. What we have is I would like to mark the state as required when the value of country equals to US. Simple as that. Simple as that, we have a conditional validator, a required validator. Nice. And if you remember, the second part of the business requirements were the following, that we would like to have the state field visible only when the value of country equals to US. And this is how we can achieve that, just by having an if condition. But you know what? What I don't like here that much is that we have to repeat the same condition both in TS and into the HTML. Can we improve that somehow? Yes, definitely, we can improve that. And to achieve that, we can utilize the hidden helper function. And we use the hidden function to conditionally hide the field. And a hidden field does not contribute to the validation, touch, dirty, or other state of its parent field. And please note that by using the hidden state here, doesn't mean that the actual UI element will be hidden as well. We have to control that. But to control that is much better, since then we have just to grab the hidden state instead of repeating the same condition. Nice. So let's now talk a bit about the schema. Previously, we talked about the predefined validators, inline validators, and I would like to shed some light in under this kind of thing. So currently, the registration form, despite that we do not have that many fields, it looks something like that, where we have the required of email, the password, confirm password, we have the validatory, we have another required, we have the hidden helper function, and stuff like that. Despite that this is not that big, honestly, I don't like the idea to have all of this kind of code under my component, in my component. I would prefer to have it a bit smaller. To achieve that, to accomplish that, what we can do is to grab all of this all of this logic and move that into a separate file. And this file will be, let's say, the registration for schema file, where what we can do is we can export, let's say, the registration schema, where we're going to use the schema helper function again from Angular Forms signals. And then inside here, we will add just the validators and the logic. And to do that, what we have to do is just to go to our component, cut the validators, and paste them here. And it will become a bit bloated, let's say, but this is on a separate file. So I don't care that much, right? It is my logic, and it's not bloat my component. And currently, if we go now to my component, this is how it used to be, and this is how it will become after we import the registration schema. Nice. So don't get me wrong, I don't mean that we have to use the registration schema just to make things a bit cleaner. We use the predefined validators to compose multiple schema and multiple validators at the same time. Let me give you an example. Let's assume that we have into our application, into our project, we have, let's say, a business requirement that whenever we have to deal with email, I would like the email always to be required. I would like the email to follow a specific pattern, the email pattern, and consistently, I would like to have these error messages. Okay, so this is under my email schema. And now what I can do is just compose this email schema to my existing registration form schema. How? By utilizing the apply helper function. I would like to apply what the email schema were under my path.email. And just by doing that, we are composing different schema validators. So let's now make up a bit the requirements. Okay. Uh, what I mean is that currently the user registration form has only one field, the email field. How about if we have some additional emails as well? Something like an array where we have a plus icon and the user can just click this plus icon, to add one more input, type the email, click the plus icon, and so on and so forth. The requirements here is that we would like these additional emails, every additional email, to follow the same validators. How can we achieve that? Well, to do that, we can use the apply each helper function, which applies the email schema on each additional email of that array. So let's now say that we are done with the user registration form, and let's now jump into how to create a contract. And for the contracting, like what I said previously, we don't care about the details. What we care is that we have a big form. We have the contracting information here. We have the client information. We have the scope of work, where here we can just add some array items for the deliverables, for the milestones. We have the project overview, we have the terms and conditions. So you can say that this is a big form, and this is, let me see if I can scroll here. Yeah, this is what it looks like in terms of my writable signal. So it's a bit big. So let me ask you now the following. Would you prefer to have all of your HTML template, or all of your HTML code under the same template, meaning to have the raw form fields of the contact information, to have the raw form fields for the client information, scope of work, project overview, terms and conditions? Do you prefer to have all of this code under the same HTML template, or would you prefer to split that to smaller components, something like that? So if you're like me, you would prefer to have something like this. And as you can see, we have the contract information, very easy to understand and very easy to reason about. We have the client information, scope of work, project overview, and terms and conditions. And as you can see, the way that I'm applying here, the binding is consistent to what we are doing already for the input fields and the thing that we saw previously. So let's now jump here into the scope of work. And I would like to see what is the implementation of this one. And if you remember the scope of work, we have also the option to click an item, a button, and add some array items. So we'll see both of them. The very first thing is how to bridge that component with my main form, with the parent form. And all we have to do is just that. We have to create an input. Of course, it should be required. And we're providing the field tree generic type of, again, we have here just my scope of work model. Just by doing that, we are bridging these two together. And into the next slide, we will also see how to apply the binding into the HTML template. But before we go there, how about now, if I want to mutate and add some deliverables? We are currently under the scope of work. So instead of emitting an event, what we can do is just to grab the field. This is a signal input. That's why we have to use here just the parentheses. Walk through there, deliverables, grab the state, grab the value, and the value is a writable signal. And you can do whatever you like with this kind of writable signal. And just by doing that, you are mutating and the values are propagated to the parent form. And now let's see how to have this kind of binding into my HTML. And the binding is consistent. All you have to do is just to use the field directive and just walk through the path, walk through the field. And again, here we have the parentheses because field currently is an input signal. So this is how we are applying all of this kind of logic. And if we can see now a bit more abstract, what we can say is that whenever we have a parent component, it's a very good idea to have small children components, and every component can have different schema files. Child1 schema, and the same thing can go for child2 schema. And how can I now compose them together? This is where this kind of composability shines. We can compose that into my, let's say, parent form by applying. I would like to apply child1 schema where for my child1, just by providing the path. And the same thing can go with my child2. So it seems that we have a bit of time. So you know what? Why not have a look of how now to create a custom form control? So if you remember in the past, what we have to use? The control value accessor. And we all know that control value accessor is a pain, right? So let's see how to do that with signal forms. All we have to do, all we have to create is just a star rating component. The maximum star rating will be 5, and we can see here that I have 4 out of 5 selected. If we now see what the code looks like, what I have is just my star rating component. I have my rating, which is the actual value, which is just a model. I have here just my stars, which is a computed property to generate the stars array. And then just an event whenever I'm clicking into the star item, nothing related to forms. And now this is what the HTML looks like. Again, nothing related to forms. All I'm doing here is just I'm looping over the stars, I'm applying some classes and stuff like that. Simple things. Okay, nice. So how can I use that now? How can I use this component? Of course, this is trivial. All you have to do is just to use the selector. The input, if you remember, was a rating, and this is what we have to use, right? A rating, and the value will be 4. But the ask here is to have this one as a custom form control. So how can I convert that now to a custom form control? Well, all we have to do is to convert the rating that we're seeing here to a value property. Just by changing this name, we are managing to convert this component to a custom form control. And if you are if you want to see how to apply also the path there, the binding with the rest of the form. This goes the previous code, and this is the new code, the new attribute. Sorry, where we have to use just the field. Same thing. Nothing got changed. But I know the value here feels a bit, let's say, abstract, and it would be nice to follow a specific and strict rules. Well, yeah, that's right. And we have to implement the form value control, which is a generic type. And if we do that, if we implement the form value control, this form value control will force us to create the value. And that was the last thing that I wanted to present to you today. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Fennis, for having the very detailed talk. And it was a pleasure to have you. And it was quite, what I can say, it was quite beneficial and kind of very knowledgeable in terms of Angular 21, since we have lesser documentation available on the internet other than Angular guide. So people are authoring and writing articles until they got a good hype. Like these sessions are kind of very good, but thank you again for getting some time for us at NG Finland. So yeah, hope we will see you in NG Finland 2026 on site here in Vasa.
That
So
would be amazing,
yeah,
Muhammad.
so thank you so much again for joining. And we have some questions from attendees. If you can please see chat, I think few of
Okay.
the questions in the meeting chat, if you can answer those, please.
Yeah, definitely. So let's see. Thanks a lot for different ways for arranging the events. So state is not the same as previous status, valid, pending, invalid, and disabled. State is not the same as previous status. Can you please elaborate a bit more here? What do you mean about that?
Yeah, I think if you are on the call, so
Hello. Yeah, yes, hello. Thank you, Voice, for arranging this event, and thank you, Fanis, for a great presentation. And it is a nice coincidence that your book, Mastering Angular Reactive Forms, on my table since yesterday. I
Oh, nice.
use it as a reference. I needed it yesterday, and now you are presenting. This
Very
I
nice of
was
you.
talking about the state because you talked on the state of the form, the signal
Mhm.
form, and you said that valid and disabled and touched together under the same category when you talked about the state.
Yeah, so let me go there
So
a bit fast. I think it was somewhere here. Let me see.
when
Where was that thing? It's not I have quite many slides.
yep.
Yeah,
That's why I said like it's very knowledgeable in terms of
use these values,
yeah.
and you said the state about them. Thank you.
And your question is state is not the same as previous status. What
Yes,
do you mean previous
yes.
status?
Yes, we have for the regular forms, the previous versions, status is different than touched, for example. Status is for
Oh, I see.
and touched and pristine is different. Have they are their own events. Thank you.
Yeah. I see. So you're comparing the reactive forms with the signal forms in terms of the state properties, right?
yep, seems
Okay.
like
Yes.
Venice.
So there are some similarities in terms of status properties. There are some new items, something like the submitting or the submitted status. And I think this is not the complete list. This is just an example. I think this is a confusion. How to have, let's say, a complete list. I think pristine is there, touched is there as well for sure. And almost everything that we had from reactive forms, we can see them into signal forms as well.
But the properties are actually being marketed towards signal based rather than the reactive ones, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, exactly.
Thank
So
you, Fanis.
Yep, I think all the questions are being answered. So thank you so much again, Fanis, for joining us, and hope to see you again. And thank you so much for attendees as well to join, and see you guys again in the next event. Bye bye.
thanks a lot for having me. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
guys.
Bye bye.
Thank you all. Bye.